There we go. Right. So, I just wanted to talk to you a bit about speed and movement.
Uh-huh.
I know that you studied neuropsychology at Manchester.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if you can see any parallels between um, the sport that you do and the amount of speed and movement that it kind of entails and other areas of your life. So, does this tell you anything about how you are wired?
Well, it's a difficult one because clearly motorsport or the process of driving a racing car is there's a lot of different processes. There's a cognitive side, there's your kind of how you drive, your perception, and then there's a sensory side, so what you feel, all that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, in the industry so far, it's not a huge amount of research going on to it. They've managed to what's the word? They've managed to find no link between, say, for example, reaction times and how fast a racing driver is. So that's
Wow.
not to say that the best drivers don't have good reaction times, but it's not a way of measuring how good a racing driver is. So
Wow.
therefore, it's easy to see that what makes racing drivers, particularly special, or what makes a racing driver capable of doing what they're doing, is more than just reactions.
Mm.
So one of the things I kind of realised as a driver was it was a lot more about anticipation.
Hmm.
So it's a lot to do with mental planning.
Hmm.
And part of the exercise we do as racing drivers, we spend a lot of time, mentally rehearsing laps and
Yeah.
mentally rehearsing everything really. So I guess it in some way it can then help when you actually drive.
Yeah.
You're prepared for it. And we use simulators for the same reason. Just it doesn't actually simulators don't inflict any force on your body, but you're using the same cognitive processes as when you're actually driving. So your
Mm.
brain doesn't really know the difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Wow, that's really interesting. So, you kind of train for your racing skills through like visualization quite a lot.
Yes. Yeah, visualization is definitely, as I say, just my feeling is when you're talking about a racing car, once you drive a racing car, you get a good idea of the grip that it's got, the handling it's got, and obviously our job as racing drivers is to tune the car so it goes as fast as it possibly can. But even once you've got the car set how you want it, you still have to interpret that grip. You have to interpret how you're going to approach the corners. And therefore, there must be an element of planning before you even arrive at the corner. When you think about it, you don't just arrive at the corner and then react.
Mm.
There's
Mm.
a lot of planning. So the visualization side is actually very important. Of course, in junior racing drivers, it's quite a common mistake to not plan far enough ahead.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it literally comes down to them not looking far enough ahead. So as soon as those basic rookie things are out of the way, it becomes a lot more about visualizing. And if you don't plan very well, you will be slower. You won't be as effective. So last year in particular, I was qualifying, and qualifying is basically one lap. You have one lap to deliver the best lap time you can. And I found the biggest improvement in my performance was really taking a lot of time to visualise, to know where I was going to brake, to have driven the lap in my head already before
Yeah.
I even drove it.
Yeah.
And that really is, quite a big thing in my career because I never took it that seriously in previous years. But I realised what I was doing wasn't working well enough at the level I was at. So the visualisation became, pretty key part of it.
Wow, that's really interesting because I thought you were going to come out with an answer like, oh, I've always been into doing things faster and faster, and a bit of a sort of speed junkie in every sense. But actually, it comes down to much more conscientious skills like planning ahead. And
Yes.
there's a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that actually use planning as a main kind of skill to have in life, which makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
So it's just fascinating that that's your sort of mental training. Can you tell
Yeah.
me something about the physical training that you would do?
Yeah, so the physical training for racing, for my type of racing, which is endurance racing, the clue is in the title there. It's the endurance is what we have to consider because we race between 6 and 24-hour races. So
Hmm.
that my part of that would be 2 hours in a 6-hour race, and I'll do 8 hours in a 24-hour race,
Mm.
over 24 hours.
Mm.
And that will be broken up, but clearly that is a monumental feat for a racing driver to have to drive
Yeah.
at that sort of and it's not, and again, it's not the speed, because part of being an experienced racing driver is everything becomes slower because you become good, and the skills you acquire allow you to use a lot of automaticity as you're driving. But the point is you're concentrating very hard for a long period of time,
Yeah.
in different sort of conditions, different lights. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of obstacles. There's just 24-hour races. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and a lot of things you can do to make a mistake. So it'd be difficult just to do it, never mind at the limit of what the car is capable of, and with other people chasing you. So the endurance aspect is what we train for mentally, because if you're physically fit, it means you mentally are more agile. The actual act of driving a racing car is physical, but once you tend to train your neck. Your neck is the thing that gets the biggest abuse, because when you drive prototypes like me, they create a lot of downforce. That's a lot of lateral G-force.
Yeah.
And of course, you're strapped in from the shoulders down, so your head is free.
The least bit.
So your neck needs to be very strong. Your legs need to be very strong, because the brake requires a lot of pressure to generate the stopping that we need. We do have power steering, but again, your shoulders and your arms are in a constant state of work, so they also need to be fit for endurance. So most of the training we do is similar to what maybe a triathlete would do.
Yeah.
But we can train. Interval training generally is what I do, because I prefer to have slightly shorter bursts of training, just to keep my metabolism going. And we don't, the idea is, once you get in the car, you actually, if you need to and you feel you're getting too excited or too agitated, you just slow your breathing down and you try and relax. So your ideal state when you're driving on the limit is actually sort of, it's 60% of your heart, maximum heart rate, not 80 or 90%, like people might think.
Yeah. Well, that's again ties in quite well with kind of the psychology of exercise and health, because obviously we're doing endurance racing. You up your capacity for coping with stress, and with prolonged sort of stress, you give your whole nervous system the ability to kind of like buffer the stress for longer. Which I suppose is what you must be doing for those 2 hours at a time. I mean, driving
Well,
8 hours a day.
In a 6-hour race, it's a lot easier, because you do your 2 hours and then it's done. So what the 24-hour races do, they really magnify all of this preparation, because you do 2 hours, you get out, and then you've got another 3 lots of 2 hours. But you don't do it all straight away. You've got to wait another 4 or 5 hours before you get back in.
Yeah.
And then you can't necessarily sleep well. So there's a number of things all come at once with the 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's not just the endurance, it's the sleeping patterns, and the, going into the night, racing in the night is very tiring as well.
Yeah.
So that's where your physical preparation. So I train a lot more intensively in sort of 2 months before a 24-hour race, because you absolutely have to be at the peak of your condition, because if you're not, that's when you're either gonna feel a lot of lethargy, and you're gonna feel physically tired when you're in the car, and that will, it doesn't mean you're going to crash, but it means you have to slow down for fear of crashing. So the more lethargic you feel, the more you tend to just leave a little bit of a margin.
Yeah.
So that's what all of us do in road cars. If you're feeling tired,
absolutely,
and you can't sleep, you just chill out. But of course, in a race, you cannot chill out. You know, someone's always there, sort of just trying to beat you. So it's kind of that's when the preparation of endurance, means that you mentally. Again, you said it best. It all hinges around that mental acuity and keeping that, at optimum. And of course, if your body's physically tired, your mind will be tired, and everything else gets affected from there.
Yeah, I can really relate to that, because there's been times when I've recently driven around France in the camper van, and just been so exhausted when we got back off the Dover ferry after driving like all day, that I just wasn't safe to drive because of tiredness. And so I just had to go to sleep in the back of the camper van and let somebody else drive. So I suppose and my other question was in terms of your overall lifestyle. Now, you've mentioned about sleep and training intensively in the run up to a race.
Yep.
But something that I'm interested in is people who live, for want of a better word, quite a nomadic lifestyle.
Yes.
In terms of visiting different places, traveling. So, have you seen a massive change from in your lifestyle from when you were studying at Manchester to when you were sort of competing to now after winning Le Mans? Has your behaviour changed in that time? Has your kind of day-to-day habits and behaviours changed in that time? Your well-being? What sort of differences do you notice?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting is because everything really that drives me, it's all based on the motivation to win. It's something I've had since I was very young, maybe 14, 15 when I got into racing.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about wanting to win, and so anybody that's competitive about anything will understand that. We can all be competitive, and so I guess I understood at a young age I was just annoyingly competitive, and I hate losing at anything. And so the racing side, there is more to it because of course once you get invested in it, you need to be successful for money. You need to be successful for respect from your peers, for pride yourself, to please your parents. There's a lot of other things, but that core motivation is the thing that drives everything. So it forces you to sacrifice things, in pursuit of what you're trying to gain. I've made a lot of sacrifices to get where I've got, and of course it's motivated me to continue a healthy lifestyle and to continue training and to steer clear of things I might have wanted to do, but I didn't. And it all hinges around that sort of motivation, which has become pretty subconscious. I don't even think about it. Yeah. So winning Le Mans, I was wondering, because it was such a highlight of my career, I wondered if it would change. I'd be like, well, okay, that's it. But all it's really done is reinforced it, So it kind of gives you, you just want to win more. We nearly, Le Mans is part of a world championship, which we led for most of it, and we very nearly won. We finished second. So of course, we finished second. So if anything, it's really just reinforced, maybe through just the sheer enjoyment and satisfaction behind winning that race, which not many people in their life will ever do. Sort of makes you realise, yes, you're capable of this. Yeah. So just keep doing what you're doing, but do more of it. Yeah. So certainly when I got to Christmas, I really relaxed and took my foot off the gas because I was totally exhausted. But as soon as the years come by and I've come into training with more motivation, more determination, than I even had before.
Do you know how to take your foot off the gas?
Well, because you have to brake for corners, But that's in sort of in terms of the nomadic lifestyle. Yes, that is problematic because time difference, especially when you're doing international races, and I do a bit of driver coaching, so that includes travel as well. It is a nomadic lifestyle, so you just have to manage your time slightly differently to someone that has a Monday to Friday job. But ultimately, it ends up being the same kind of thing. It's based on routine. So I have to make sure I train a certain number, usually 3 days a week, 4 or 5 coming up to a race. That routine cannot be broken. If it is broken, then I start to feel very agitated and like I'm, losing condition, losing fitness, and that's quite important because otherwise I probably just wouldn't train. Why would you do it? Why would you? Why would you go and put yourself through all this punishment? It's not for aesthetics or anything like that. For me, it's very much to do with my sport and what makes me tick.
Yeah. So it sounds as though this is quite typical of sports people, and especially professional sports people, is you have one win, and if you're doing it right, then it just enhances your motivation for more, which is just classical conditioning,
exactly,
or operant conditioning even, and with your routine and stuff, do you have like a set routine that you sort of have to stick to almost superstitiously? Like you're saying there, you don't feel right if you have sort of a change in the routine, and how do you stay organised, I guess, in this routine?
Yeah, well, again, it all comes down to planning, forward planning. So, if I know my calendar, so it's very simple, really. And I think it's a problem a lot of people have when they set out to, for example, lose weight or get fit. is they just don't plan it very well, or if they do plan it, they're not disciplined. When you have this kind of career where you have dates and you have to travel there at this exact point, everything has to be quite meticulously planned. And therefore you need a great deal of discipline, to follow it and so in other words, you've not a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
So that's the date. That's the date. That's when you're there. So therefore, you can plan around it. So I just generally approach it quite analytically. Maybe that's more just because of my personality, but certainly sportsmen in general have people who take care of that for them. So, for example, around Le Mans, I have a physio who tells me everything: when to eat, when to stretch, when to train.
Yeah.
So they kind of take over that role for me because
Wow.
it's a particularly intense, couple of weeks. But normal life, I just plan, and so my routine, it's more about making sure that I put in the work, because if I haven't put in the work at the gym, for example, I know through prior experience, I will feel weak. I will feel the weekend is more difficult, and therefore you can look at it two ways. You can just get through because you can. If I don't train, it doesn't mean I'm going to be going slower, but I will feel more tired. I will feel more agitated. And therefore it'll affect me. So, I try to avoid that by making sure I'm well prepared. So again, it comes a lot down to discipline. So it's kind of similar to someone that would perhaps set out on a 6 or 8 week regimen to really get fit. It only works if you set a plan and then you follow it with discipline. And that's kind of how I live my entire 12 months of every year.
And I guess I suppose you have to plan in you have to actually actively plan for some downtime as well, because if you don't, then you won't know what to do with yourself, I guess, if you don't have like a plan to actually have, like a pit stop, so to speak.
Yeah.
Just use
use
lots of cheesy terminology.
Well, no, that again, it still comes down to planning. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So when I'll plan, if I have a free week, I go, right, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that's the training. So it gives me rest days in between and days to kind of chill out. So of course, I'm not as regimented as planning this pub at that time or anything, but it's the way it works out is there's so many hours in a day that as long as my work routine and my training routine is set, I always enjoy the sort of downtime because I haven't really planned it, because I have got time and freedom to do everything.
Yeah, you don't go to pieces then.
No, exactly. It's because the thing is, because I always know something's coming soon, so it gives me a bit of time to enjoy it. So I think around usually this style of doing things, especially around the sort of autumn part of the year, is when I start traveling around the world. I have China, Japan. Last year, 2 years ago, we had Brazil. A lot of different time zones, a lot of long flights. It did burn me out, so I was happy to get to December and just say, right, I am not planning anything. I'm just going to recharge, and I'm going to do that. But to be honest, it lasts about a week, and then I'm already thinking about January, February the next year.
Yes, yeah.
So it's but for me, I don't really see any other way of maintaining that kind of regimen without just being very disciplined about it. You can't. If you're too latchy daisy with your application, then you can't deliver any results.
Yeah, and there's some very good lessons in there for students in undergraduate courses or otherwise to do with being disciplined and being organised and being regimented and planning, and having a system to plan.
One word we didn't mention was responsibility. There just comes a great responsibility in racing. There's so many drivers, there's drivers with money who'll come and pay to drive your car. There's a lot of other good drivers. There's a lot of people queuing up to take your position. It's kind of a very finite resource, is a race seat in a top level race team. And so that adds a great deal of responsibility, in the same way that managing money, once you know what's coming in and what's going out, they're your constraints. You're bound by that. And if you don't take notice, you run out of money, you end up in trouble.
Yeah.
So with this kind of job, and it's not just the success, it's trying to stay there. It's a year in, year out thing. You're working all the time to kind of stay at that level, because if you don't, you can be out and forgotten about very quickly. So that responsibility definitely, again, partially motivates you, but it's essential that you react. You've got to be conscientious. If you're not conscientious, someone will look after you for so long, but when you're on your own, you just won't get anywhere. And I see it with my younger drivers. They're okay when they're looked after, but if they're not, they tend to go to pieces. So it's part of what they need to learn.
Yes, yeah, it's all about learning to be more self-aware, isn't it? And it sounds to me like you've kind of reached a stage now where you've got that level of self-awareness that's required to work out, right, how do I actually operate my life? How do I actually make things work and get things done? And that takes a lot of self-awareness and knowing, like you say, where your boundaries are and where your constraints are. So that's really interesting. Last question then. What would you look for in a, say, personal trainer? You mentioned your physio. And what sort of tips would you have for anybody who's, say, going into the health, well-being, fitness, training, coaching, that sort of business? What would they need to do if they wanted to work with like a top-level sports person?
Well, because I drive, but I've been coaching for 10 years as well. So in terms of the coaching thing in racing is, it's very similar to being a personal trainer or being a physical coach. You're doing much the same thing. You're with them, and you're using your knowledge, the things you've acquired. You understand the industry better than they do, and sort of by helping them through it, you're speeding them through the learning curve. But of course, with racing drivers, personalities, everything is quite complex when you actually start dealing with people. So, of course, they have to be knowledgeable and they have to really understand the particular subject with which their client is concerned. So, for example, if it's general fitness, they need to have good knowledge, and the knowledge is important. And the same if someone's wanting something more advanced, they need to make sure that they have it well researched, because as a sports person, you can tell and you can really feel when your trainer conveys that level of knowledge. It gives you confidence. It gives you confidence that they're giving you the right advice, which gives you confidence that you're doing the right training. So certainly the knowledge is very important, but of course in that is the way you convey that knowledge. So it should be done in a way that's very sort of just building a good relationship with whoever you're with is extremely important. So you need to be friendly, and you need to be on their side without pandering to them, or sort of just giving them whatever they want. And that's a difficult line to walk on, but it is possible to do it.
It certainly is.
So it's for me, as I say, if my trainer really just really feels like, if I feel they live and breathe what they do, it just makes me feel so much better, because I just know that they're going to look after me. If I say to them, what about this area? And if they don't know, they're honest and they say, I don't know, but I'll go and research it. That's more important than them either making it up or going, I don't know, and seeming disinterested.
Yeah.
So a passion for what they do is good, because I think we kind of associate and empathise with it, because if you're a sportsman, you're passionate by definition, because there's very rarely there's not a lot else in sport other than passion, a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Even if you're an Olympic athlete, there's only footballers and a small minority get really, really wealthy. The rest of it is a lot of sacrifice. So that sort of passion amongst your trainers and yourself is a nice thing to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes for I suppose anybody who's looking to work in any career. It's like if you're just doing it for the money, or you're doing it because you feel that it's the only option available to you, and you've not got the passion for it, then that's only going to get you so far, and your performance isn't going to be as good, and you're simply not going to develop comprehensively, I suppose, in whatever field you're doing. But it sounds like you're really in the flow of what you're doing, and completely I need to think of the word. No, can't think of it. You're basically just like you are all in 110% in the flow.
Yes, yeah, and I think if you were to look at the success and failures of drivers over the years, it all comes down to that. If the ones that are all in doesn't mean they're going to make it, but the ones that aren't all in for sure never do.
Yeah.
There's no way. And if you know, I've come across, I've had various personal trainers, physios, and if you said to me, just name the best ones, I can instantly picture them, and I can picture their, not just their knowledge, but their enthusiasm for the subject. You know, so I wouldn't think of them in terms of what they charge or what they've done, or you know who they are in terms of you know, status. I just think about their passion for what they do, because that tends to, for me, I think if you're going to be good at what you do, you have to be passionate about it.
Yeah.
As you say, you can't sort of fake that kind of thing, and you can smell it a mile off if they don't have it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. Oh, right. Well, fab. I'm going to press stop now. So that was that's recorded all good. Let me just see.